So, hello everyone and welcome to this EWA talk. I'm delighted to see you all, to have you with us, and to welcome you to our Europe Voices of Women in Film program in collaboration with the European Women's Audiovisual Network. I'm Sonja Heinen, I'm the Managing Director of European Film Promotion, and with me are my colleagues Jo Mühlberger, he is our Deputy Managing Director, and Andreas Struck, who is managing our favorite Sydney program for us every year. And just briefly to say what EFP is, we are the International Network Organization of all the National Film Promotion Institutes from throughout Europe. Each of these institutes is responsible to promote their national films and their national talent abroad. And for EFP, they come all together to conquer the world with the European films and to promote European films and our European talent, particularly in countries outside of Europe. So each let's say Europe Voices of Women in Film is a program which we have started in 2016 together with and at the Sydney Film Festivals, also in times before COVID. Back then, it started as basically our first step to take a stand for gender balance in film. And since then, we select every year together with a wonderful team of Nashen Moodley at the Sydney International Film Festival, show and promote 10 really outstanding films by outstanding female directors. And I'm really happy that we have you here with us. Our partners in this, without who we couldn't do it, obviously, are the Sydney Film Festival, is also Creative Europe, the media program, is Eurimage, and of course also EWA. Media partners are Screen International, Fred Film Radio, and the great online magazine Fate to Her, which we are very happy about the interviews we see there. And now I would like to hand over to Tamara Tatishvili, Strategy Manager, primarily responsible for relationships and international relations and partnerships at EWA, and the best moderator ever, to start the session.
Thank you very much, Sonja, and greetings to everyone. I also have to say, not because of the protocol, but because I do feel so, that I'm massively thankful to this continuous cooperation we have with you, European Film Promotion, team of Andreas, Sonja, and Jo, who are always part of this conversation. If I'm not wrong, it's the third year we have put this in practice. It happened that this EWA talk with EFP was brought to life during COVID time, and we really had, and some of you might remember, a very good exchanges and created somehow naturally this safe space for filmmakers to discuss not necessarily only the declarative part of gender equality agenda and everyone aligning on the same spirit and the same message, but rather really trying to understand what does it really mean for each of a filmmaker, you know, how and if those issues are approached during filmmaking or in stories or when sourcing the inspiration. And I'm very happy on behalf of our team at European Women's Audiovisual Network that this cooperation is continuing. And without further ado, I must say that actually all these calls are not about the institutions, but it's actually about you, the filmmakers, because if it's not you, those programs wouldn't be existing. And for me, it's a very practical and very inspirational moment in the year when I have a privilege of watching your films. Sometimes I have already seen it, I must say, in different festivals where you premiere, or if not, I always get these screens, well-organized screeners from Andreas, and I do look forward for these meetings because there are different reasons why. One, you learn a lot and you see all those stories that as an audience, you know, simple representative of an audience gets you inspired. But on the other hand, this is also a tool for the festival, for EFP, for all of us to somehow use this video as a teaser to connect your films better to the audiences, not only in Sydney, but also the ones that go online, watch this conversation and say that, oh, I really want to pick up that film and see what that filmmaker really meant when discussing a specific subject. And thirdly, European Women Audiovisual Network obviously stands for empowering female talent. There are different directions that the network is active in. It started out of grassroots action and research, but now it's much more about programs, training, workshops, fireside chats, and networking opportunities in different festivals to bring talent together, to position talent in a better ways, and to not only talk, but also walk the agenda of the equality, which is not the easiest action to take, but definitely is something in making. So for this edition, we thought it would be very nice to run this 1 hour conversation or exchange in a very informal manner, and to see through your films, make people, audiences, viewers understand whether and how you are approaching the issues of gender representation. Is it something that is cautiously in your mind when you are filming, or it's something that comes with intuition, instinct, and then you sometimes have to look at it retroactively? And with Andreas, who is my real collaborator on this program, we always talk and exchange before we all get together. And this time we thought maybe there is no clear common line somehow in this selection of the films, and it doesn't necessarily always have to be in terms of the thematic line. But after watching all your movies, I thought that actually there is one, and there is a very singular creative perspective that all of you are bringing in and looking into the topics with a very genuine perspective. And in this gender and largely discuss diversity issues, if you like, the perspective comes up also very high on the agenda now. And I would like that we all talk about the issues to which you agree in gender identity and representation, but also the issues to which you do not agree or think that it's not really part of your filmmaking vision when making a movie. And if you will want to say something just out of blue, feel free doing it, because this is a conversation of filmmakers about their very specific filmmaking process. And I would actually like to maybe start with Laura, if you agree, a director of Small Body from Italy, who is now in one of my favorite places, if I understood correctly, in Trieste. Laura, I saw your film, I think it was back in Sarajevo, because it also was there in the festival. And I was very impressed. I've heard about it already when you premiered in Semaine de la Critique, but I was very impressed that it's a first film and it brings this mythical drama, if you like, the way I saw it, and the echoes of Catholicism and folklore, and it makes it so genuinely contemporary in terms of the thematic, you know, having your character, having this issue of a stillborn baby, but to me it's also about creating an own destiny that your lead character tries to take us on journey for. So could you maybe tell me, but also the people who will watch us, you know, from where this arch came to have such a complicated and complex setup, but such a strong contemporary message as well of your female character?
Hi, and thank you for the question, first of all. I don't really know if it's like doable to go back to where was the very first idea and how all the layers came out. So I think this is really difficult, but let's say that we started with a really simple idea, which comes from real pilgrimages that used to happen in my region, Friuli Venezia Giulia. So I've been told that there used to be a place where you could bring stillborn babies in order to have them back for the time of one breath to baptize them. Because in Catholic culture, if someone is not baptized, he's supposed or she's supposed to go to limbo. until 2007, because limbo doesn't exist anymore. So this is what the Pope decided. And yeah, we started with a really simple idea, which was telling the story from the perspective of the mother of this baby, according to the fact that in all the documents, all the historical documents, the men used to take the road. So the men used to go to the sanctuary. And this totally makes sense because the mothers were in bed after, like, they were recovering after the giving birth moment. So it was not like, let's say, a political issue at the beginning. It was not like, okay, I want to talk about it on the female perspective, but it was, yeah, it was rather something like, I'm really interested into what is left out from the frame of the history. So the gray zones. And I thought and I felt that there was something there, that there was space for me and my collaborators to imagine. And so this is where we started. I don't know if I answer your question, but maybe it's like...
No, absolutely, because it's interesting for everyone to understand. And then this, the character of Lynx, if I may ask, that also, you know, brings in a different perspective somehow, you know, how the two human beings start to interact and support also each other on this quite complex quest to reach the place. And this came also from the inspiration of this stories that you've heard, or you wanted to challenge more the gender representation?
Yeah, no, this is a retrospective, I would say. I mean, okay. I totally agree with you, but this is something that you, but also me and a lot of people in the audience project on the character. Because actually Lynx comes from, again, yeah, historical researches. So Lynx is a fluid character. And at the very beginning of the idea, we didn't have any links. So the main character, Agatha, was traveling alone. And yeah, the journey was pretty boring, I would say. So this was the reason we wanted to have someone like a buddy to travel with Agatha, to help Agatha. So when I'm saying we, I'm talking about Elisa Dondi and Marco Borromei, who are the co-writers. And we started like guessing who would be the right person to travel with Agatha. So we built these two characters like a chiasmo. So they're like counterpart to one of the other. And if we're talking about archetypes, Agatha is the mother archetype, and Lynx is what we end up with, how the feminine aspect can contain the masculine as well. And
that is exactly what I think is very interesting for that specific conversation, because it's not like that you've created a recipe for ticking the boxes while, you know, being in this research phase, or even probably drafting different versions. But at some point, those issues came into your realm, and that is what we're trying to capture. So thanks very much for flagging this out.
Thank you.
And then I would actually go to Thea, because that is also first feature from Denmark, As in Heaven, and it's a period piece as well. Somehow I see it kind of a continuation of the conversation. Of course, I congratulate you, Thea, on your film had an amazing and it's having an amazing festival circuit, and the two awards in San Sebastian Film Festival, which is obviously very nice. But I was particularly impressed how you've managed to set up this whole, you know, like an ambience, not only the character, but this kind of a locked mood of the place where all these characters are coexisting and trying to maybe sometimes believe and other time question the existence of the God, but also in a very specific manner. I felt that you are questioning the patriarchy, the issue of patriarchy somehow, but not in the most kind of direct way. And I think it would be interesting to hear from you. I know that the film is inspired by a very well-known novel. But when did you decide, and what was your main trigger to enter this story with the young girl, but also the other female characters?
Yeah, so I read that novel just a few weeks after my own son was born, and it was a novel that I'd always been drawn to. It's called, in Danish, it's called A Night of Dying, and it is that story. It takes place over 24 hours, and the mother goes into labor, and very quickly on we learn that this labor is probably not going to go very well. In the novel, it's told from almost like a God perspective that looks down on the little humans. There is no main character per se. It's more like you see these little women, especially women, moving around in this arena. And early on, I knew that I needed to tell the story through the little girl who is in the process of leaving the farm and having all these dreams, and how her whole life gets changed around over one night. And I mean, for the patriarchy or like a questioning of that, it was actually never something that I thought about consciously. It just happened to be a story that spoke to me and that I wanted to tell, and that just happened to be about women. And I thought that there's something interesting also at telling the story about the women in the late 1800s, because usually you don't stay back with the women. You always leave with the men if they go to war or, whatever they do. But this time you're in the household with all these women and feeling these 24 hours. And that was what drew me in to the story. What was the other question?
That was interesting. But you're also in that story somehow infusing a lot of hope, I would say, and that's also is a form of empowering somehow a female character, and they may be a not black and white decision of saying that you decide everything in your destiny, but you can certainly change things in your destiny. So was that something intentional or also came with the process?
It was definitely intentional. Because the story in itself is quite small, but it's all built on that little 13-year-old girl and her hope and dreams, and that she feels that she can do something to change the outcome of whatever the mother is going through. And she tries to pull all these different strings. And I mean, a big thing of it is that she turns to God. And then when she gets to the part, in the prayer where it's let his will be, she can't continue, because what if his will is to take mother? So it's definitely also a story about losing faith and taking on your own destiny, and somehow realizing that life happens and you can't do much to whatever outcome is going to happen, but you can somehow learn to integrate integrate it into yourself and rise to your challenge, rise to your destiny.
Wonderful. And this rise to your destiny, but kind of also being open to self-discovery, moves me a little bit towards more contemporary setup of the films that we have. And it's difficult to see on Zoom, but I'm looking at you, Ali, because I would like to come to Finland and with the title Girl Picture, which is really a wonderful quest of 3 young women towards self-discovery, if I may say so. And when watching it, but also discussing with a couple of other colleagues from Finland, we were saying that is the film that maybe representatives of many different generations could say that, I wish, there's so much of what we wanted maybe to discover and could not for some of the social structures or pressure. And I wonder how did you decide, and what was your main reason of putting this very lovable, lost, crazy women together and show us what probably all human beings are going through once in a lifetime to understand who we are and where we belong?
Well, in our case, and when I say us, I mean myself and the two writers whose names are Ilona Ahti and Daniela Hakulinen, it definitely did actually start with that question or that need that you mentioned, which is that we felt that we hadn't really been able to identify with too many female characters in films, especially young women and as young women. I'm not saying I'm young anymore, but as a young woman, I didn't have too many I could identify with. And, you know, films were so important to us always, of course, but that was kind of something that was nagging us. And we felt like we knew Ilona and Daniela had wanted to do a teenage story to begin with. And so we knew very quickly that we wanted to have all these different type of girls, because we felt like girls on screen are so often a one-sided functional character who comes to support the male story or to be a very specific sort of minuscule archetype in a way. You know, we're all very accustomed to girl as objective or object of desire. We're all very accustomed to girl as victim. We're very accustomed to girl as the woman who asks questions so men can look great doing their heroic things. And we just wanted to have a film that represented girls taking center stage and specifically on their own terms. So that was the starting point. I don't think in the writing process we were constantly talking politics. We were certainly constantly talking a lot about representation because we had to also work through our own bias in the process. We had so much of it, you know, it's misogyny lives in all of our backs of our heads, very unfortunately, and you really have to work through. And the process was started before Me Too, and Me Too changed the dialogue a lot around these topics and themes. So we certainly went through and walked through a long path. But the undercurrent was there constantly, you know, like this sort of secret feminist mission of creating representation on screen. That was something that we had been lacking and that we really wanted to see.
And that's wonderful because already only 4 of you have spoken and you already see so many different perspectives, but you know, the form might be different, but the end result, if you like, is that we are contributing to something that is really important, but we're doing it in our own way. You are doing it in your own ways, and probably, and that's only my opinion, of course, there's no need to put everything under a specific uniform as long as the process, you know, is moving forward. And this girl is not a victim. That is very strong in your setup, I would say, is really resonating strongly. And I think that brings me to Lovisa, road movie that we have here in the selection, Maya, Nilo, Laura, right? And there as well, Lovisa, I think that you are kind of questioning a family structure somehow. And there's a lot of relationships or story that happens between women and children or kids. Of course, men are there, but men are not having a central character, I would say. And maybe I'm wrong and you will tell me differently, but I felt that that's one of the core investigations and discoveries is this relationship through the roadmap between women, kids, and exchanges and some very fun moments, but also some crashes. So was that part of your intentional decision, or you've been also trying to discover it without politics, but as part of the filmmaking process? You need to unmute yourself.
Yes, there. Yeah, it was like at just the start of this idea, I really had that urge to make like a story about women and kids and like without men, or like what happens when the men are just outside their bubble. So that was like the core idea from the beginning, and like two sisters and they're very different, and yeah, the men are just like on the side far away. So I think that's why I made it as a road movie, also to like have them stuck in the car together and what happened in that room without men. And then in the process, it was like, but the men are also quite interesting and they can affect these women so much. So they have like the ex-husband and the fathers, and they're also like an important role because they're affecting the main character so much. And the guys that they meet also on the journey are also like really interesting dynamics for me to explore in the film. So, but yeah, it was mainly about the women from the beginning.
And did you, you've made some very successful shorts before making this movie. I remember that. So would you think that there's, are you in agreement with positioning the stories told from a female perspective, or you think that this is not the most necessary introduction and the stories need to stand for themselves?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, I think, because it's something like intuitive that I think, like, because I want to make a film that I want to see, and I'm interested in seeing films about women that I can like relate to in some way, and I can be really sick of like when I'm watching old movies or new movies too, but when I like get fed with, it's still like male characters everywhere, especially older films. So it's coming from somewhere from me that I want to see more women on film, and it makes me want to do films like that. But I think like not every time I have that drive to, like one short film I did, I didn't like really think about it so much. But I think even if I don't think about it, it's supposed to.
As Ali said, it's beneath this kind of, you know, it's not always a frontline political decision maybe, but you know, it's something that is a triggering an emotion and the perspective. And that brings me to Tijana. So we travel to Slovenia now. Where are you? Okay.
I was smoking.
Yeah.
That's why
no problem. Bitch, derogatory term for a woman. I think that really is. I would give a prize for the title. Even it's wonderful, and I thought that if you look in beyond this film being a really very interesting dramedy, and the way you capture awkwardness, I think this is pretty remarkable with your characters and relationship and what happens in the film. But I'm more wondering, we know that there is an issue with the numbers of the female directors and access to budgets and so on, but it is even more complicated when you see into the comedies and the dramedy genre as such. So I wonder how easy was it for you to pull this film in Slovenia and convince your financiers? Maybe we start from there.
I think you never know how easy it is when you get the money to make the movie, because you get it. I think I'm working in theater for 25 years. I'm a theater director. Basically, I wanted to do movies. I was doing movies, co-directed a movie in our own production and stuff like that. So it's really hard to on my CV to get a movie in Slovenia in a way. But the screenwriter Iza Strehar, she was part of this Scenarnica. This is a project of developing scripts in a group with mentors. So you do it in our film festival. This is part of our film festival. You develop this scripts during 1 year, which mentors other script writers, and that's how you catch the attention of the film center that gives you money. And this scenario was quite good, and the producers of the movie asked me if I wanted to do it, because when they heard the pitch, they thought it would be the thing for me to do it. and I was really impressed. And why Isa Stricher wrote the script, as she said that when she was in this situation, she wanted to see this kind of movie and she couldn't. So that's why she wrote the script. Okay, and then this gender equality thing started to happen. This, how do you say, this numbers of females have to be in balance with men. And I came into this picture, so it was quite easy for me to get the movie because
so right moment is yours. Yeah.
But we got so it is the lowest budget movie from the film center ever, because but there was a lot of enthusiasm. I'm not young, but it was my first movie, and all these young people really participated on low, how do you say, with, they were not paid well, like nobody was, but we did it anyway. So yeah, that easy it was.
And in your theater career, before kind of crossing to the filmmaking in a new role, let's say, would you also be exploring female characters, or it was not?
It's not that easy. I did over 70 shows in my life, and I did what I got, because this is in theaters that they have a repertoire, and then they have this vision of each year, and then they pick texts, and then they invite you to do it. So on a few occasions I did stuff that really mattered to me, and I don't know, I did Edith Piaf, a cabaret. It sounds so trash when you say it, but it was really cool. No, I didn't have a chance to choose many stuff that I did in theater. It's rare, but I'm interested in people and in their how to say, intimate problems. Not into big stories. I think that I've seen my this character Eva as a superhero in her own world, but she's
exactly, yes. And it makes her so contemporary, and as a character she could travel to any country really, and to any setup and in any reality. So I think this is really, I highly recommend watching all movies, obviously, but it really is a very, very special selection. And that brings me to Alina, because I think Alina is coming from Romania, and she's representing here the film Blue Moon, which was also in San Sebastian, right, Alina, if I'm not wrong? Maybe you were there even together when Tea's movie was there. And well, it's a mesmerizing film, really, with this very, very strong take on dysfunctional families somehow, but also on this specifically your main character involving in layers of relationships, and somehow also learning how to protest things that a woman does not want to accept. I think this is done masterfully in your film. And if I'm not wrong, you are saying that it's also some kind of a personal experience and knowledge of the place that brought you into the decision to make this movie from that very specific perspective. So maybe you could tell that to our viewers. Where does the idea come from, and why did you decide to show that mountainous part, and what's happening in that specific place?
Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily my personal story, the story of Irina, but when we started to build up the script, because we're doing an interdisciplinary work with Inlight School of Film and with the University of Bucharest. This is how I work with my students. When we started to do this type of work, it was because in a way or another, I never felt when I was a child that I don't know, good schools or books were allowed to me, or that they could be reached by me. I always felt, because I was from the countryside, I always felt as if it's something impossible to achieve. So I wanted to tell this story about girls in the countryside trying to get higher education. Only 2% of the girls in Romania are ever getting higher education in the countryside. It's actually kind of the same percentage for males also. So it was not necessarily a story about a female character in the beginning when we started. And I used to live there until I went to high school, and I could notice that around me, my friends were dropping school day by day because they had to do, I don't know, land work, or they had to raise their smaller children because of the huge immigration to Italy that we had in that area. Parents were absent. So I really thought, after a couple of years when I was a university teacher, I really thought that going back to that community, I'm gonna reach out or I'm gonna see some change. And I was shocked to see that it was actually worse. Now everybody was missing there. I mean, the community is based on children living there and making their own rules. And I started to gather some stories, and I was very impressed by the fact that everything was very emotional. So we started to create, in an interdisciplinary way, a script that was based on emotion, not necessarily on a very classical structure. And to be honest, the moment when we realized that we are talking in a way about a woman's struggle, and that we are very close to the gender bias in many, many ways, was after we were awarded the Golden Shell in San Sebastian, when we had all the press conferences. And it was, I think, that maybe the most important change that our film brought to Romania was that, for example, the main actress, Irina, Ioana Chițu, she became very preoccupied with this movement, and she's now a very important voice towards promoting females. I'm trying to be a voice towards promoting a partnership between males and females, because it's very hard for me to believe in a fight against. I believe in a fight together with all the other participants. So
But you've mentioned something interesting, which is also this transformation, right? Or that it was the case of your actress, that, you know, through this process and through the movie, she now looked at things differently, maybe. And you cannot like order this on online and get this. You have to live some kind of experience to understand if you want to change some of your practices or make yourself be part of the movement. So that's also interesting, I'm sure, for our audience to understand that this agenda is not black and white, and there are gray zones, and there are transformations that happen through stories which are equally important. So that's what you're referring to.
Yes, yes.
Well, you've talked about emotions, and this needs, I think that the Bianca is very well positioned.
I'm sorry to interrupt. As I told Andreas, I'm actually in the middle of my PhD exam. Could I please?
Sure. Yeah. Good luck with that. Thank you very much for being with us. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I come back to a documentary, an absolutely wonderful documentary called 3 Minutes and Lengthening. And Bianca is here with us. And I could talk about this film for a day, probably, because it really is so interesting in different manners. But if something can show a power of a memory, that's really how I watched the movie. You know, it's somehow and also then I understood that you're also saying that as long as we are watching the history, it's still not over, right, Bianca? This is something that you have put in this film, in this project. And you also you are a historian and a cultural critic, so it is for sure that you've been looking into this subject matter of equality agenda or gender representation from different perspectives. So what's your vision of all this? You know, how do you see gender representation, and is it something that is high on your agenda or not?
Well, with this movie, it was a bit difficult to address that, because it's found footage from 1938, shot in a town in a small town in Poland, not so far from Warsaw. So I didn't have any agency in what was shown. That was found footage. But of course, you think small things you can try to make a bit explicit. For instance, someone who appears in the footage was found much later, and he is the only one who appears in the movie who is still alive. So we have his memories, but he was a 13-year-old boy then. So that, of course, colors what is remembered, that perspective of age and gender. So in that sense, you always have to try to be aware about whose memory you are able to access, let's say.
Absolutely. And that's also what I personally, I always underline, because of course there are different opinions on this matter, but I do not think that we always need to talk about female directors making movies with female characters and on specific topics, because that also makes it a bit complicated to absorb. And I think that in this round of the selection, you have very singular creative voices coming from documentary world as well, that are bringing in like really pieces of histories through these memory points that we would not otherwise know unless we really get exposed to what you found also into the form of making this movie. So that is as important as any other film that puts specifically female character on the core of the perspective. So that's important for the network as well. And that brings me to another documentary, which obviously is focusing on Patricia Heightman. So Eva, I'm looking at you. You've been exploring notes and diaries of someone who's very central to many of the issues that we have already tackled and your colleagues been talking about. So could you maybe tell us how and why did you decide to dive into that and do the Loving Highsmith documentary?
Yeah, well, first of all, I really stumbled upon her because I had just come from my first home from my first movie where I presented that at the premiere and got also an award. And then I went home and thought, now I have made a film about my obsessive father, about an obsessive man. Maybe I would like once to do a film about an obsessive woman. And then really some days, only 2 days later or so, I stumbled upon Patricia Heightman and thought, oh, well, probably that's the obsessive woman I'm looking for. I don't know if the movie was about obsession in the end, but definitely she was extremely interesting. And I started, and I was also very totally astonished that there was nobody ever had made a film about her, although she was that famous. Probably that's the case for a lot of very famous women, which is a bit of an advantage for us filmmakers because we have a lot to do. We can make many films about great women which have not been made before.
Yeah, and you are also bringing, as Bianca was, you're living that memory that is alive again. Yes. And there's so much talk about the characters that have been invisible or the histories that did not make it for different reasons. So I thought that your film is very interesting from that perspective as well.
Yeah, and I think with that film, it was very clear that from the beginning it was about gender identity a lot, because she herself struggled with this topic in all her life, being a lesbian, closed up, as it called, closeted lesbian in her time, but what I really found interesting when I started to read her diaries was that the representation, her public image, was so extremely different to what I read in these diaries. This really intrigued me to go deeper and try to research how can this happen, that the public figure can be have such a different image to what I experience her in her notes or by the things her friends, her girlfriends, especially her lovers, tell about her. How can this be? Is it that probably she has changed so much in the course of her life? Is it really that she has changed? Or is it just a misrepresentation of that writer in the public image? And definitely was also the second, because she was also in interviews always asked things that just spared out everything that could not be talked about, which was her sexual identity, her family matters, her love matters, which was obviously a big part for an important source of inspiration for her. So she ended up being this strange in the public image, this strange misanthrope, very somber, old, grumpy lady somehow. And somehow it also was okay for her, because it was a bit part of her crime fiction world. It was close to that. I think she did not always correct that image, but it was also a question of total representation in the
and also this ambiguous identity that you put very well forward in once we discover it as an audience, and somewhat, I would say, profound the meaning of the love, and also how she's been actually approaching that emotion. It's also something that challenges the stereotypes, let's say, or the social norms, and that was also very, very, very interesting. Well, please go on.
Sorry, maybe the time is up, but
no.
What I also thought was very interesting, that Patricia Highsmith herself always talked about herself as being a non-feminist. She was totally not comfortable with the idea of being a feminist, but she lived a life that was completely opposing to any stereotypical gender roles of her time. So she just thought of herself as she identified with men, basically, who could do all the things she wanted to do, like gain money, travel, have sex as much and as freely as she likes, and so on. She just identified completely with men. I always thought that's a version of feminism that was possible in that time. Or something.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. And that brings me to the last intervention, if I may say, and that is from Antonia, who is, I think, having such an interesting career of moving from a very known acting career, somehow having this directorial approach right now with the film called It Is in Us All. It's wonderful to have you, Antonia, and to also have had this journey of seeing your film, which is such a poignant look at the masculinity somehow, completely different, everything different, your female director really exploring this self-discovery of the man and what happens in your story, and yourself being part of it somehow. I thought it was a very strong creative process happening in front of our eyes. So how do you see yourself? Why did you decide to opt for for discovering this male
well,
character.
It's really interesting what Eva was just saying, because like I'm sure many actresses find this, but in the beginning, many years ago, when there were certain films that I was in, I kept being asked if I was a feminist, and rather stupidly at one time I said no, which I learned to regret. But I didn't mean it as no. I just meant that it was so intrinsically obvious. It didn't feel that it had to be a blatant choice. Like, and then I learned that obviously most people and many people don't have that privilege. And so you have to be blatant about your standing and your stance as a feminist, because some people don't have the right, you know, and the privilege automatically. But in terms of the film, so the fund was from Screen Ireland, and it was specifically a women's fund. So, you know, you apply and then you win the fund, and it's narrowed down. So it's called POV, and it's for women. And I found that somewhat, I wanted to challenge that notion, because always I had been confused by why there were always these stereotypes and boxes that, you know, that as a performer, as a writer, as an actor, that you have to fit into. And I never felt that comfortable sitting in them. And I was very, you know, and I think that, so basically with the Women's Fund, I decided to make a film that was populated only by men, and to take a position of objectifying, but not negatively, to give them the landscape and to give that characterization. And also, we talk about things, people, maybe men embracing their female side or the more feminine side, and I couldn't understand again why those words apply and are necessary. Like, I do feel more akin to a more masculine side, but why is that even a thing? I mean, we're just people if you break it down. So I wanted to try and showcase a landscape of male without allocating any gender stereotypes to it. And I think that's also how I see the world and how I wanted to show how I see that landscape. I don't think I have necessarily, I didn't want to make a feminine point of view on it. I just wanted to give them that platform. Yeah.
Well, that could be the best wrap of all that has been said. We happen to be extremely on time, so I think the Zoom Live has shown us to be very efficient on these exchanges, and there's absolutely no need to go further than that. The idea has been to highlight all of you as a massive creative talent, and also to show to the current but future audiences that there are really amazing stories coming up, and via watching your films, you get acquired with the story, but you also understand instinctively or not what's happening while, you know, working out on that agenda topics that we've been discussing. So it doesn't have to be taught always, but it can be also experienced by a story, by the filmmaking process and the way you work. So I would like to thank you very much, and thanks once again the team of European Film Promotions for making this meeting happen. And unless Sonia or Andreas or you have anything to add, I think we can call it the show and continue our day and morning. Yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Tamara, and thank you all of you. That was really, really exciting.
Thank you very much for being with us then.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I'd like
you.
to see all the films that were discussed.
Yes, thank
And
you.
enjoy Sydney, those of you who go.
Exactly. Yes.